good morning to everyone, and welcome to this session on the role of values education in children's language learning. And I'm just arranging my chats because all of the people there down the side. Okay, that's great, because I'd like to be able to see the chat so that you can put comments in there. So actually in this session, what we're going to be looking at is what are values, what is values education, how children learn values, and most importantly, a practical toolkit of activities that we can do in our classrooms. And I think in the context of our volatile and fast-changing world, where wars, populism, xenophobia, and post-truth politics thrive, values education is more important than ever. And education and values are inextricably linked, as these quotations here show. Okay, so now my PowerPoint is stuck and not moving on. Okay, so as these, I won't read these out, but just three little quotations here that show the link between education and values. And the next one here. Okay, that values education goes to the heart of the role of the teacher in effective learning for children. And this last one, sorry, I'm actually having problems here. There's something sticking in the PowerPoint, which is causing me a few problems here. But let's hope that this won't carry on. Okay, and I think at this time of the pandemic, well-being, mentioned in that last quote, a pedagogical imperative for student well-being, is more important than ever. We know how much children and young people have suffered over the last year as a result of the pandemic, and we need to prioritize education that safeguards their well-being and doesn't just focus on measurable academic performance and tests. And the contrast between an approach that focuses on standardized learning, a narrow curriculum, and much more holistic learning, and a focus on child well-being, can actually be summed up by this exchange between Pooh and Piglet in the famous Winnie the Pooh. So how do you spell love? You don't spell it, you feel it. Okay, so this brings us on to the question, what are we talking about? What are values? And you might like to just put any ideas or words that come to mind in the chat box. And actually, values is a very complex area, and there are many, many different definitions. Some definitions talk about it as a disposition to act in a certain way given the opportunity. People's feelings, yes, lovely. Okay, there some definitions, exactly, things that are important to us, kindness, exactly. Some definitions talk about it as characteristics and qualities that make you a better person, such as honesty and courage. Other definitions talk about an ethical DNA that is actually hardwired into your brain and determines your behavior without realizing it. And some definitions talk about the priorities that individuals and societies attach to different beliefs, experiences, and what they treasure. Since we're talking about children, I want to share with you a definition that has actually been used with children and that children can understand. And this is Neil Hawke's definition based on a whole school values-based education policy. And I think that definition as a working definition is one that's very useful, especially when we come to talk about how we approach teaching values in the classroom. But there are, of course, three dimensions of values that I think we need to think about and be aware of. And the first area is cognitive. the thinking, the knowing, the understanding reasons given in justification of those beliefs, and they supply the motivation for the adoption of values. So we have the cognitive dimension, we also have the affective dimension, in other words, the volitional dimension, if you like, the will, the feeling deeply and believing in values and wanting to be a certain way. And the third dimension that we can't forget is the behavioral dimension, that the way we actually act and behave. And all of these, of course, overlap and influence each other. And I think the other thing that we need to establish is the way that values refer to different spheres. And so, for example, the blue sphere is the fear of self. Okay, so can you think of, you may like to pop in the chat box there, values that relate to self, for example, honesty, reliability, perseverance. Also, for example, we may think of values that relate to others. So, for example, control, yes, that's one for yourself. Respecting others, yes, lovely. Do pop your ideas in the chat box there. Tolerance, kindness, that I noticed someone mentioned before. And the red area of values here to do with the environment, so things such as, you know, recycling, using water sensibly, kindness to animals, throwing litter away, social justice, and so on. So those then are values, and we've looked at the different spheres and dimensions of values. And so what actually are we talking about when we talk about values education? And if you'll forgive me there, I'm using a definition that I came up with myself in 2016. And the reason I want to use it is because actually this is what I am talking about. I'm not going to read it out, but there's a little, have a little moment to read that now. Okay, so that in fact is what we are talking about. So what I'd like us to go on to do now is to have a little look at how children learn values. And we're going to look at 4 different ways before we go on to our toolkit of practical activities. So how children learn values, and please do put your ideas in the chat box. I'm sure we got lots of shared expertise about this, and it would be lovely to hear your ideas. So the first way, family, absolutely learning by example, copying from parents. Fantastic, your ideas coming thick and fast. That's wonderful to see that we're on the same page about this. And actually, in a way, I've summed up some of your ideas here about parents and families and so on by the first point here, through socialization, that actually, you know, children's habits are approved or not by adults. You know, so a child says, I want an ice cream, and you say, what do you say? And they say, please, okay, and why they're important. So socialization is hugely important, and as someone's just put there, you know, teachers have a hugely important role in this too. The second way, through modeling. And we, of course, are the models. And this is to do with walking the talk, living the dream, providing a role model, and actually embody the values that you talk about. Remember that famous quote from Gandhi, be the change you want to see in the world. Okay, and the next way, to actually do interacting with others. Yes, lovely, you've anticipated my point there. The thinking and acting. So it's actually the process of inducing critical and reflective thinking, rational choice and responsible behavior. So actually to enable children to think, to reason, question, reflect, to care, to feel concerned, and to act accordingly. And the last point that I want to mention here is actually the language of values. So the importance of giving children an ethical vocabulary which can develop ethical intelligence. In other words, the ability to be aware of the thoughts and actions of themselves and of others. And if that sounds a bit kind of grand, what I mean here is actually teaching children words like kind or helpful or generous or honest or hardworking. And by actually learning that vocabulary, we're helping them to develop an understanding of the concepts behind those two and begin to think about how to incorporate them and how much they wish to incorporate them in their own behavior. And obviously, the fifth way is through activities that are explicitly designed to develop values and to get children to think about values at the same time as developing their language skills. And this is where we move on, if you like, to the main bit of our session, is to have a look at a toolkit of values activities. And these are going to be ranging over different ages and levels, from pre-primary to upper primary, and I would also say even lower secondary, and based on things like songs, rhymes, philosophy for children, poetry, drama, role play, games, content-based learning, stories, and picture books. So a lot of practical ideas now coming up. And as a task in the chat box for you going along, please put any ideas about how you might use or adapt these activities to different kinds of teaching situations, you know, whether you are teaching face-to-face or whether you're teaching online or hybrid. So do pop in any ideas that you would like to share with everybody here, because I'm sure, well, I can see already by the chat box, we all have a lot of ideas to share. So the first activity I wanted to start off with is one that promotes class identity and team values. And I think these days this is more important than ever to help create a sense of classroom community, team spirit, bonding, and a sense of belonging. And so what we might do with an activity like this is, first of all, brainstorm positive team values. And we might do this by referring to teams children know, maybe in sport. And also this would be an opportunity for us to introduce, elicit, recycle vocabulary that may be needed. What children then do is that they choose one value and design and make a card for a team poster or a flag. And remember here that, you know, the useful acronym TEAM, together everyone achieves more. So they design their own card to contribute to this poster or flag, which of course can be electronic or real. And then the next phase, that children actually decide on a name for their team. Okay, they might decide to call themselves the online heroes, for example, and children suggest ideas, and then you can do an online poll to choose the one they like best. And then as you go on, you then refer to the class by the name they've chosen for themselves. And this is incredibly powerful in reinforcing the sense of community. And children can also, of course, design their own team or class logo. And of course, these kinds of values that you've got on the little post-it notes that I wrote up there, we need to develop in children as from preschool, because values learning doesn't happen overnight. It's a long-term process, and these values need to be developed always in age-appropriate ways. So, for example, we might use a little rhyme and clapping game to develop the value of cooperation at preschool. Now, I don't know if you're watching this webinar on your own or with anyone else. If you're watching with someone else, you can do this little clapping game with me, where the idea is that the rhyme talks about cooperation, and actually we cooperate together as we do it. So the rhyme goes like this. Everybody ready to clap your hands? Okay, so we go, let's work together. Let's cooperate. I help you, you help me. It's great. It's great. Let's work together. Let's cooperate. I share with you, you share with me. It's great. It's great. Okay, so I hope you were all doing that. And if there are people at home listening to you, they don't think you've gone completely mad. Okay, we can also, of course, use songs to develop values. And here's a little example at preschool, okay? And this one is on the value of making an effort and developing a growth mindset, you know, based on the work of Carol Dweck. And this one is at pre-primary. We're not going to actually listen to it now, but it has this wonderful chorus that goes, I can do it if I try. Yes, 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 I. And of course, actually that spirit of making an effort is actually appropriate at all ages. And in fact, I've even done it with teachers, okay? So you could sing this song, I can teach online, it's here to stay. I can teach online every day. I can do it if I try. Yes, yes, yes. Okay, so the idea then of values education being a long-term process that goes throughout all those early years and well into secondary, of course, as well too. Another powerful tool for teaching values is based on the work of Matthew Lipman way back in the last century, P.A.R.K, and that's philosophy for children. And the aim behind philosophy for children is to teach reasoning and argumentative skills and to develop their critical thinking. Okay, so Matthew Lipman and Robert Fisher, also in his very well-known books, teaching thinking stories and games for thinking. Okay, so the idea is that we actually get children through philosophy for children to explore different values concepts. So in this one, this little example here, which is based on an idea from the book below, I've given you the reference there. And what the assumption is that children don't know what the word selfish means, okay? So selfish. What does it mean to be selfish? And you're going to actually tell children this little situation and you're going to ask them to tell you 3 things, okay? And then you tell this little story, and it's a hot day and Harry the hippo is cooling off in a pool and 3 other hippos come and join them. And he says to them, no, you're not getting in here. There won't be enough space for me. And they say, okay, okay, don't worry, we'll go somewhere else. Then later in the day, Harry goes to find his friends. And on the way, he sees a monkey stuck under a fallen tree. And the monkey says, Harry, can you help? Can you move this tree for me? And Harry says, no, because I'm going to hurt myself getting through all the fallen trees. And he walks past. And then when eventually Harry finds his friends, they're eating. And Harry says, can I have some food? And they say, yeah, sure. And then Harry, what he does, he greedily eats all the food himself. And they say, hey, come on, leave some food for the rest of us. But Harry eats as much as he can and then says goodbye. So on the basis of that story, we ask children, 3 things that they can tell us about being selfish, okay? That you don't share things, okay? You could put your ideas in the chat box, actually. Yeah, please do share your ideas in the chat box. What else did Harry teach us about being selfish? You don't share things, you don't help others, and thirdly, you think only of yourself. Now, the important point doesn't help exactly. Okay, we then go on to talk to children. Is it right or wrong to be selfish? Why? And of course, what happens? Children usually immediately say wrong, that we should help, value, and be kind to other people. But then they start to think about it. And sometimes they think, maybe it's right. Sometimes you have to put yourself first if there's something important. And there are some things you mustn't share, like answers in a test. And actually, by asking questions to probe children's thinking, you lead them to deeper thinking. And I've had children come up with, and not in English, I must admit, in their own language, but I don't think this matters because we really are exploring the values here and you can recast back. And children say, but if you get pleasure from helping other people, is that selfish? Or if you only help people so they will help you in return, is that selfish? And another issue that may come up, if other people are selfish, why shouldn't you be as well? And some of this language, as I said, is going to be in children's first language, and your role as mediator in this process is, of course, to take the key ideas and recast them back in English. We can also go on to ask children, so if you're not selfish, like Harry, what adjectives do describe you? And then we can share the adjectives like helpful, thoughtful, generous, willing to share, and so on. And then as a follow-up, children can continue a story in that in a way that Harry learns a lesson from his selfishness. In fact, a story I remember when I've done this with children, they say that Harry gets stuck in the mud and he can only get out with the help of his friends, making him realize the value of not being selfish and helping others. Okay, so philosophy for children then, a very powerful tool for values education. Something else that I think we can use is poetry. And this poem by Shel Silverstein shows that values are not black and white. So let me just give you a moment to read that poem. And you can see that it's based on a series of questions, possibly one word there that would be problematic, sloppy, okay, which we could explain by contrast with the word neat. So what we might do with this poem is get children to identify the adjectives and their opposites, and then work in pairs or in breakout rooms and make a list of more adjectives and opposites. For example, they might come up with lazy, hardworking, kind, unkind, generous, mean, okay? And this could involve some dictionary work. And the third phrase there is that children create their own zebra moments. So we have these three phases. We identify, maybe we underline them, we circle them, we make a list of more adjectives, and then children create their own zebra poems, which can be wonderfully creative, but within a framework that also provides very specific language practice as well in question writing. So for example, things like children come up with lovely things. Are you clever with silly moments, or are you silly with clever moments, and so on? Okay, so that can be a wonderful activity that integrates the development of values education, thinking of values with specific language practice. Another idea that is also flexible and that you can use in many different ways is discrimination activities using the alphabet. Okay, so you can get children to write A to Z in a column, and for example, to brainstorm food with each letter. And if they can't think of a letter, if they can't think of a food in English, they just put one in their own language, or they write pass. So it's not a big deal. We're not looking to actually find a food for every single letter, but we go through it, okay? And we absolutely accept food in their own language if they can't think of one in English. Because then the values part of this activity then comes when you actually get children to go back over their list and they circle the healthy food green, the unhealthy food red, and the food that is a treat, in other words, you know, you can eat it, but you mustn't eat it too much of it, with yellow. And you can do this activity with lots of other things as well. For example, well, you might think of some ideas and pop them in the chat box. You could do it with free time activities, for example, and then you go back and circle them depending on whether or not they give you exercise, or you might do it with animals, whether they're wild and dangerous animals versus farm and more domestic animals. So actually here, what we're talking about is essentially it's vocabulary practice, but we are taking things further by including that focus on values, in this case, the value of healthy eating or doing exercise. There are also, of course, games that we can play using a values focus, and based on, you know, activities that are not rocket science and that are probably familiar to all of you. And this one is a card game, okay, a card game with a values focus. And here we're actually going to play a memory game. We have 2 sets of the same cards, and the way we play the game is that we turn over the cards and say the words, and when both words are the same, the game is that children either say a sentence about themselves or someone they know following a predetermined pattern. So again, this specific language practice, I think da 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 because da 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 da. So for example, I think I'm helpful because I tidy my room. I think my brother is kind because I can ride his scooter, okay? And if the rest of the group accept the sentences, the child keeps the cards. So this is actually looking at games that we know, games, you know, that we've played forever in the classroom, but that we can actually adapt and give a particular values focus. And of course, another source of activities for values education is drama and role play. And drama and role play gives children an opportunity to explore values and how you or others might act. And so in these kind of activities, what we need to do is invent values-based situations, okay? And this is key, we need to create role cards to support ideas, because children need that scaffolding in order to be able to do the role play, and those will be more or less detailed depending on the level and age of children. And then children prepare and act out the role play. And in my experience, I find it very helpful usually to actually get the children to work on this. They write it at first, they write it, but I'm not interested in the language accuracy of the writing, just getting their words down, and they then act out the role play, but without their script, and that scaffolds and supports their work. So for example, here we might, the situation might be, imagine a friend steals a bar of chocolate from a shop. Role play the conversation you have with her. And your role play cards for the one who stole the chocolate, the notes might be, no one saw me. It's only a chocolate bar. Only this once. Promise I won't do it again. And the notes for the friend might be, doesn't matter, it's only a chocolate bar. Should never steal from anyone. I should report you. How do I know you won't do it again? So with those notes, they then act out their conversation. The money one might be, imagine finding money in the street and deciding what to do with it. And again, you might prepare with role cards that the friend one wants to keep it. We found it, so it's ours. If we give it to someone else, they'll only keep it anyway. Friend two wants to hand it in at the police station. It isn't our money to keep. Someone may realize they've dropped it. As a matter of principle, we have to hand it in. It isn't ours. And we then role play the conversation. And the third example there, imagine a friend cheats at homework or in an exam. Should you or shouldn't you tell the teacher? Okay, so these are ideas that we're practicing turn taking, we're practicing communication, we're practicing interaction, we're giving a lot of support for this, but we're also developing these critical and problem solving skills and getting children to reflect on values. Another example I'd like us to look at now is through content-based learning, okay, because content-based learning can particularly help children to develop values about the environment. And here I'm drawing on materials that are freely available on the world's largest lesson website. I've given you the link at the bottom there. Based on the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Okay, and this one to do with the climate emergency, and you tell children that they're going to watch a short video called A Call to Climate Learning, featuring children and young people from around the world. And we ask children to predict the kind of climate change issues that will be talked about. So you could put your ideas in the chat box there. If you have some ideas, what might be talked about in the video? Come on, guys. In the chat box. Okay, what might be talked about? No? Nobody has any ideas? No? Okay. Well, here are some ideas. Greta Thunberg, actually, absolutely, microplastic. Yeah, lovely. No. Okay, so here are some ideas. Here are the issues that are actually talked about in the video. And then we would get children to actually choose one of those issues and work in breakout rooms or groups to share what they know about these issues and report back. And this would be an opportunity to introduce them to or remind them of relevant vocabulary. And they also might identify other issues which aren't included there, such as melting glaciers and rising sea levels. We then go on to actually introduce children to the people in the video, and they predict the issues that they talk about. So I think Helena talks about deforestation, for example. I think Dante talks about endangered animals. The initial task, children watch the video and match the people and issues. Or if you like, they can note the audio in which they speak. And then they give a personal response. Which person and initiative do you admire most? And when they watch the video the second time, they choose one person and find out more detail about the problem and the positive action that they've taken. I obviously can't show you the video now because this is being recorded and so on. But actually, I've given you the link down there. Do go and have a look. It's a really useful resource and you're encouraged to use it as part of your lessons. And post-video, children report back on the issues and actions taken. And as a follow-up, children can choose a project to make other people aware of issues at their school. Okay, moving on to the last area that we're going to be looking at in terms of teaching values education, integrating values education into our classes. And this is to do with storytelling and values education, and Picturebooks are obviously a very powerful tool with this, and we've got examples here. For example, Something Else on the left there, which is a wonderful book about differences and exclusion. Giraffes Can't Dance, about empathy and bullying. Lost and Found, Loneliness and Importance of Friendship, and various others. And these examples are suitable for primary children with A1, actually in many cases better A2 level of language. The problem is, and I know this, that they're difficult to get hold of, and they're also expensive. And actually, unfortunately, especially now with Brexit, you know, it's difficult. You pay a fortune ordering things from the UK. And also, the truth is that we also need stories which embed values education right from the start for our youngest learners, and that provide low-level language input that is part of our syllabus. So we're going to have a look at an example now. I'm going to ask you 3 questions. Anything for kindergarten? Yes, coming up. What values are integrated in the story? Okay, what values? What's the key vocabulary? And what features support children's understanding of the story? Okay, so I'm going to give you a quick run through of the story now, and it's called A New Friend. Okay, and the situation is at school. Okay, and Mrs. Cat is the teacher, and she says, "Good morning, children," and the children say, "Good morning, Mrs. Cat." And Mrs. Cat says, "This is Katie Kangaroo. Katie is a new girl." And Mimi says, "Hello, Katie. Welcome to our school." Mrs. Cat says, "This is Katie's first day. Please tell Katie, what do you do at school?" "I draw, I colour, I paint at school," says Mimi. Zoe Zebra says, "I sing and I dance at school." And Dylan says, "I count and I think at school." "Ha ha," says Mrs. Cat. "Yes, you think a lot, don't you, Dylan?" "Oh dear," says Katie Kangaroo, "I don't like school. I want to go home." Katie sits with Mimi. "Please don't be sad, Katie. I want to help you. Do you want to draw, Katie?" "No, I don't. I'm sad. I don't like school. I want to go home." "Oh dear, poor Katie. Do you want to colour, Katie?" "No, I don't. I'm sad. I don't like school." That happens about 3 times. Okay. And suddenly, bring, 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 the bell. "Listen, it's time for sport." "I want to run," says Dylan. "I want to jump," says Zoe. "Off you go now, children." The children go outside. "I've got an idea," says Mimi. "Katie Kangaroo wants to jump, don't you, Katie? Let's jump." "Great idea," says Dylan. "Look at me." "Very good, Dylan." "Great idea. Look at me," says Leo. "Very good." "And look at me," says Katie. Boing, boing, boing. Oh, wow. Amazing. Go, Katie, you're fantastic. Katie jumps around the playground. Boing, boing, boing. Oh, thank you, Mimi. I'm happy. I like school now. I don't want to go home. And I've got a new friend. I'm happy too. So a little values story there for preschool, and the values that are developed are obviously, I mean, it would be nice to see your ideas in the chat box, but the values here are social awareness, empathy, tolerance, respect, kindness. And actually what's happening, we're showing within the story children moving beyond egocentricity, friendship, absolutely, and learning to decenter and thinking of others and not just themselves. And obviously, the language there, we've got the school activities, paint, draw, sing, color, count, and the way that we use our pictures, our voice, and repetition in the story, okay, so that the children are getting that language, that repetitive pattern of the story. And I think a little story like this shows the power of stories in developing empathy and awareness of others. And of course, you can use the audio, you can use the video, or you can tell the story yourself, which personally I always prefer the first time I tell it. But the important point here, learning values is not a tick box exercise. It's something that is acquired slowly over time. And so what we need are stories that reflect the same values in age-appropriate ways as children get older. So let me just give you a little example here. Here are little frames from stories that are all focusing on the same value of making an effort, persisting, and hard work. And the stories are based on fiction or history or legend and are suitable for children from pre-primary to upper primary. So there we've got, for example, in the top left-hand corner, you know, Mimi is learning to dance. She can't do it. She gets very frustrated. She's not as good as her brother. And then she gets a little advice from two birds and suddenly, you know, she learns how to do it. Or the one in the middle there, more suitable for sort of 8-year-olds, the story of Robert the Bruce, the legend with the spider. If at first you don't succeed, try again. And we've also got for older children, real historical stories. We have Alan Turing at the top, who was told off for not concentrating all subjects at school. And down the bottom there, Joseph Cochrane, who was determined to develop a dishwasher, and I'm very glad she did. And she actually spent 6 years studying science and mechanics and learning to draw before her project was complete. I can see that David is there. We did start a couple of minutes late, so I hope it's all right if I just continue, David.
Absolutely, Carol,
to the end.
absolutely.
Okay, so because what I also wanted to mention in relation to stories is actually how very often traditional stories can be wonderful tools for developing values. Stories like The Ant and the Grasshopper, and this one, the story of the bear and the boy, but which I won't actually tell you now, but I will show you the technique, which is a very useful technique. And this is to show children an image, not from the beginning of the story, which is very often what we do, but from the middle of the story. And then in 2 groups, children predict what happens in the story, both before and after the picture. And you can ask questions to stimulate the ideas. You know, why is the boy lying on the floor? Is he dead? Did the bear kill the boy? What's the boy in the tree going to do? You know, and so on. You then tell the story, and after the story, of course, you get children to compare the story with the predictions. And the value in this story, those of you who know it, of course, is the value of not abandoning your friends when they're in danger. Okay, so we're just at the end. This is called The Boy and the Bear, the story, and there isn't time to actually tell you the story now, but the reference is on the bottom there. So pulling things together in terms of values education, I think we need to have a pedagogy of values, and the educator's role is these things. And I've highlighted the key words in red: encourage children to notice and be aware of values, help them understand the reasons for values, encourage them to reflect on values, give them opportunities to discuss values and express personal opinions and so on, encourage them to apply values to their personal experiences and lives, look for ways to expand children's understanding and to think critically and creatively about values-related issues. Remember the role play, for example, and the philosophy for children idea as well. Give opportunities to act and put values into practice. Two important health warnings. Don't be too quick to make explicit and explain values. That actually the really important thing for children and values education is when they have opportunities to discover them for themselves. And there's nothing more likely to make children reject than if they're told things that they have to do rather than discovering the value of themselves. As Bettelheim says in his wonderful book on fairy tales, adult interpretations, as correct as they may be, rob the child of the opportunity to feel that he on his own has coped with the situation. And the second health warning is to do with age appropriacy, that sometimes children are not ready to learn a particular value. And so we need to make sure, I mean, an example of mine is actually doing a princess story and getting children to reverse roles and have the princess rescuing the prince with 5-year-olds. And 5-year-olds actually see the world in black and white. And the children just looked at me. They thought I was completely mad. They thought I didn't know my fairy tales. So they weren't quite ready for that kind of values message. So age appropriacy is really important. So my final acknowledge and praise values-related behavior. My final message here, which you can read there, the purposeful integration of values education enriches language learning and has a positive impact on children's well-being, work and behavior. And it's my hope that it might also just help us to change the world. So that brings me to the end of the webinar. Thank you very much for your attention. Apologies for going over time.